Thank you very much, Kimberly and Rayanne. My name is Dawn Miller. I'm a Supported Employment Program Manager for the east side of the state of Washington. And so my duties include doing fidelity reviews, doing training like we're doing today, and then also doing consultations with agencies individually, should that be a need. So looking forward to talking with you today. We've got a lot of information to present, so it's probably going to go a little quickly. Or if we end up with the interaction that we hope to end up with from you, we might not get through the slides, and that's okay. My preference would be more interaction, less slides. I don't know about you, but that's what I'm hoping for. Darren.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Darren Paskey. I'm the Supported Employment Program Manager with the GA for Focus on Western Washington. But Don and I have been providing trainings and consultations and IPS reviews across the state for the last couple of years. So thank you all for taking time to join us today to learn about some supported employment information. And with that, we'll go ahead and jump into IPS and assisting people who are homeless today.
All right, so this may be information that you've heard before. If it is, I apologize. But we learn through repetition, so I'm not going to apologize too much. It's okay. So back when, a little bit of history. We had a couple of policy academies prior to STS starting. The Olmsted Policy Academy was the one that related to supported employment. It was a group of stakeholders from across the state that met and got information from other states in regards to what they were doing and what worked. So we sought education. We wanted to know how other states were doing things that worked out well. The 1115 transformation waiver for Medicaid came up at that point in time. One of a couple, three options that came up, and we decided that seemed to be the best fit for the state of Washington. Our leadership started working with the legislature and with Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And we had a couple of pilot projects going, actually 3 of them when I think about it. The BEST grant had 2 pilot projects doing individual placement and support. And then there was a TANF pilot project using IPS, individual placement and support. So fast forward to today, the legislature granted us and CMS granted us the opportunity to do foundational community supports with the mandate that we use evidence-based or promising practices. Individual placement support and permanent supportive housing are those 2 evidence-based practices. It's a continuous quality improvement, learning collaborative process that we've engaged in. And frankly, I think it's pretty wonderful. I've had the chance to talk to lots and lots of different agencies that are doing amazing things. And within that learning collaborative process, we've been able to share those amazing things with other agencies to bring them on board. Next slide, Darren.
So here's a look at the principles both for supportive housing and supportive employment. You can really see there's a lot of alignment in the foundation of these evidence-based practices, with really the focus on individualized services, plus that integration with the community. People are not going to find jobs, or you're not going to find housing if you're isolated in one area. You really have to be out in the community looking and gathering those contacts and making those relationship. And it's definitely having the individual for housing and for employment to really drive the process and honor those choices, and for us to do that added piece of research to align and also learn more what goes into those different decisions, whether it's looking at housing options or looking at those employer options. Also created some links here that'll be on the PowerPoint just for you to go and check out additional information on evidence-based practice for permanent supportive housing and the IPS Employment Center for evidence-based practice for supportive employment. Back to you, Don.
So a lot of agencies, in fact, most of them that are doing foundational community supports are doing both supported employment and supportive housing. If you happen to be with an agency that's not providing supported employment, this is a list of the types of services that an agency provides when they do supported employment. And you can see it aligns with individual placement and support. I think a couple of the main ideas within the list for me are the fact that It's individualized job development and negotiation with employers, which means getting to know employers well. And then it supports the individuals in the long run. The follow-along supports the individuals, which includes getting to know them well. The only way to make a really good job match is to know both the employer and the individual. So very important aspects in my mind. Not that all of them are less than important, but I think those are two that make the most sense to me as far as why IPS works. Next slide, please, Darren.
These are just the kind of top 8 principles that we're going to be talking about a little today. The employment side actually has 25 different elements that we look at, and we'll dive a little bit deeper more into these different components. But these are the ones that we focus on, as Don said, a lot of focus on relationship building with the job seeker and all these other things that really are critical parts of this. Plus, with zero exclusion, we're really looking at the agency and the culture of the organization, from executive leadership to a receptionist, to support staff, to clinical staff, everyone. So it's very encompassing when we talk about a fidelity review. But I just wanted to say, if you go to the IPS link and you go and look at some of the videos and some of the tools, you'll actually see the 25 different elements that we look at during an IPS fidelity review. Back to you, Don.
So focus on competitive employment, and that would seem to kind of be a no-brainer. And yet I think, pardon me, as we do fidelity reviews, we still see programs and agencies that encourage people to do volunteer work or participate in some kind of work readiness kinds of things. And I would ask you to kind of think about your own history related to work. The first job I got, nobody did an assessment of me. Nobody, said, why don't you try this or that? I got into a job, I tried it out, I picked raspberries and decided I was going to get a college degree. So very much a competitive job, very much not the job for me at that point in time. But this whole idea of competitive employment and just going out and getting a job within IPS is part of what makes it work so well, and part of what makes it be very much like the rest of us do when we go out and find work. So you can see a couple of the items, a couple of the ways that we determine that an agency is focused on competitive employment is that the intake, so the paperwork that happens when the person first comes in the door, everybody that comes in the door, aside from maybe young children, get hit with the idea of, are you interested in working? Would you like a referral to our employment program? The service plan or whatever, treatment plan, whatever it ends up being called, rehabilitation plan, recovery plan, there's lots of different names. That also includes on a regular basis, are you interested in employment? Would you like a referral to the program? So it's not a one and done question. It's hopefully something that happens kind of throughout a person's period of time receiving services with an agency. Back to you, Darren.
Excuse me. The other piece of the elements of competitive employment is some of the postings that are available, and we're talking about in the lobby, but it could also be around the IPS offices, a bulletin board. There's one organization I went to, they had a tree of life on the wall, and everybody who was employed was leaf. So you had this really great presentation in honoring those individuals who made the journey to employment and successfully employed. And as Don said, focus of how do agencies share stories? Do we keep it inside? Do we share it with external partners? Are there opportunities for people with the lived experience to share their voice with the organization? I know Don has shared some stories about part of the process of education starts at onboarding staff at a new organization. All those different ways really change the culture and how people become aware that competitive employment is an option for the folks that they serve. IPS is also has a focus on data. And if you've gone through any kind of fidelity review, I'm sure you've been experienced with data collection. But it's collecting it for the program, but also sharing it across the agency with staff, with managers, with executive leadership. When I ran a competitive a supportive employment program, I would also share some of the data with my city partners or King County partners, because I thought it was really important that they should know that we're getting people jobs, the wages people are achieving, and how long people are staying in those jobs, because those are critical elements that can really build a program. But sharing that knowledge across the platform is real valuable in the IPS model. Back over to you, Don.
So IPS, I apologize, both today, and I'm sorry if I'm clearing my throat. It's an allergy thing. Sorry. Individual placement and support was originally developed to serve people who have serious mental illness. And so one of the hallmarks of the evidence-based practice is that you're supposed to integrate your services with the other people providing services to a person. In this case, it says mental health treatment team, but we know a lot of the agencies providing services aren't behavioral health agencies. We also know that people on your caseload are likely receiving services from paid staff that may not be a part of your team. The idea really is building a support team around the person and being on the same page related to what's going on. I know I've heard stories in agencies where someone had perhaps a behavioral health therapist or a housing case manager that said, so you're not ready to work, you've still got symptoms, or you're using substances, or whatever that might be. The idea with this integration, or an idea with this integration, is that we're all on the same page and we can talk about those issues so that we don't put the person in the middle, so that they don't end up in a scenario where maybe one of their treatment providers is disagreeing with the idea of them going to work. It is the person's choice. And I have to say, in the lots and lots of years that I've done supported employment, sometimes I've looked at a person and said, they're going to be a slam dunk. We're going to get them a job very easily. And other times where I've looked at a person and said, yeah, I'm not so sure. You know what? I've been wrong in both cases. Only the person can decide if they're actually going to move forward. And so this integration really does help to set the stage for that to happen as smoothly as is possible. Next slide, please, Darren.
I need to apologize to my allergies for some reason are just intense today. So do apologize for the occasional break there. There's a real focus on communication and relationship building internally and externally with the IPS model. So the collaboration with the team, IPS has definitions for the components there. And some of these are key because just the first one, attends weekly service, behavioral health, mental health treatment team meetings. If you're not there at the meeting, you're going to miss stuff and you're not really going to be part of the team. When I was a program manager, I had to do a lot of advocacy that my staff would be available for the whole thing, not just for the 5 minutes to say, oh, you know, Kelly, John, April, they're all working or referrals, and then leave. That we're there to learn about some of the challenges maybe the team is going through, whether it's behavioral health, SLD, triage, those teams, but also for us to kind of share success stories and have people start thinking about next steps. Maybe some of those people who have yet to be referred, but they might do it. And I just had a incident at a IPS review where the clinician was pretty clear. It was like, person's not med compliant. The person is not coming in for meetings. They say they want a job. I'm not really sure, but I went ahead and made the referral anyway, because I know that the employment folks are the subject matter experts, and I'll let them start having that conversation engage. That's what IPS is about in terms of that level of integration where people talk and refer and share information. Also, that the information that we're collecting is shared amongst all the staff, that people can see clinical notes from one department. They can see the treatment plan, maybe even add to the treatment plan to get that employment goal there. So things are looked at that and reviewed. But definitely that shared decision making, that everybody's part of the same team, really, as Dawn mentioned, kind of driving that individualized service plan forward and meeting the needs of the individual. Back to you, Dawn. Excuse me.
So I have yet to meet somebody providing social services that isn't hair on fire busy. this principle actually relates back to that. And the hope is that employment specialists are part of those team meetings, but hopefully only up to 2 of them. The idea of them, an employment specialist having to attend a bunch of meetings and then being expected to do all the rest of their work isn't really reasonable. And so the idea here is that you look at where the referrals are coming from. If 90% of the referrals are from 2 different teams, those are the team meetings that the employment specialist attends. So it's both about being very mindful who you're interacting and collaborating with, and making sure that you're interacting and collaborating with the agencies that are doing the referrals to the supported employment program. Next slide, please, Darren.
I mentioned a little bit about the 0 exclusion, is that the individual makes that choice that they were interested in employment, and it's up to us as the employment program and the agency to give them supports and guide them through the process and support. I remember some folks would say, oh, employment, that's going to just create a lot of chaos, in the services that we're providing. Maybe, but it also could really be foundational change to get people out of poverty and really feel empowered and meet their desires about life, whether it's supportive employment or supportive education or training, or those different elements. So definitely the core philosophy is, people can work and people do work. And I think that's why we really focus on sharing success stories, because the only way I found out to share other people in programs is like, oh yeah, that program gets people jobs. They got so-and-so a job, just like Don mentioned. It's just like it can work. It's not always easy, but you lay that foundation and pave that pathway to develop that culture that everyone from the front desk to the executive director and all the clinical people in between are reverberating that message that this is powerful and we are working together to implement it, because just a supportive employment program just can't do this on their own. It really takes the support of the executive leadership and the other managers to work closely with to implement these changes. Granted, change takes time, and everybody, I would say, be patient about those change and implementation to really build a program. And that's that quality improvement cycle that we really focus on as we're implementing these different modules. Over to you, Don.
So I got to say one thing about 0 exclusion. It's one of my favorites. If a person says they want to work, that's enough. We work with them to help them work, regardless of any kind of other things going on. And in fact, a lot of those any kind of other things going on go away when they go to work. Substance use disorder sometimes does. Symptomology of mental illness sometimes does. Recidivism, I mean, you name it. And I think we've got a slide later on that shows some of those factors. But 0 exclusion is one of my favorites. Attention to preference, well, that's one of my favorites too. I guess I'm just easy. I don't know if you've ever had a job that you hated, and how long did you last there? And if you did persist and stay quite a while, what did it do to your mental health? So one of the important things that we work with is that the type of job a person does is their choice. It's based on a lot of different factors, but it should be something that happens every time you help them to look for a job. It's based on their choice, and they get to change their mind, like we all have done. But it's one of the important aspects. I will share a brief story about one of the people that I supervised came to me and said, "This guy wants to be Batman. What do I do?" I said, "Help him be Batman." And the staff person said, "I hate you." And that was probably the right answer. And said, "You need to come with me into my session." So what we did do was we talked to the gentleman about, what is it about Batman that sounds so great? Why would you want to be Batman? And it came down to the cool car. And some of you may have heard me tell this story before. But when we then identified, or he identified, that the car was really the issue, then we've got something we can work with a little more related to the type of job. It was a very respectful process. We didn't ever tell him, "You can't be Batman." Didn't come up even once. And we helped to validate that, being Batman was okay. And this aspect of being Batman was the good fit for him. So preference, client preference is huge. Next slide, please, Darren.
I just want to say that's my favorite story. I haven't come up with anything to match Batman, so that's always the top one about it. So I'm always thinking Don, but I haven't found one to beat Batman. I just want to, share that I started a job. It was a phone bank, and it was a horrible job. I didn't even last the full day. It was a couple of hours. The work was so hard and so unpleasant. So it didn't stop me from making better choices for myself to find a job that had more alignment. But I think it's a natural process. People do try some things, and then they realize maybe this isn't for me, and then have that support to go to pivot to a different career option. Individualized job choice. This is, again, we're really focusing on, the other example, Batman comes to town, right? And how do you build supports and work around that? And, honor it, to kind of, wow, this could be a challenge, and educate and see what some of the expectations would be. A lot of people contact, late night hours, all those different things as we look at other jobs and those abilities. And I think that's what's really important for an employment specialist to do, is do some of that reality problem solving, maybe take them to different environments to balance it out for environmental stimuli, customer contact, shift work, all those type of things that come into it, regardless of, maybe some of the challenges the person is, and then kind of see how they react, or maybe talk about some of the challenges those environments might impact the individual. It's more about having those conversations and doing some of that research. And also, I found it so helpful to have that job search plan, because it gives us a roadmap that we can come back to if we're having some challenges or some roadblocks that might come up. It gives us something. And then maybe we need to tweak that plan to accommodate new information or some new goals. Working with folks in supported employment, people do change their mind. They maybe say, I'll want a job, I'll do everything. And then you come back and say, well, here's an everything job. Is like, no, I don't like that. Well, let's look at some of the reasons why. And then we can write those things down and come back to reaffirm the path that we're on. And also, depending on the relationships people have in the community or with their family, with the ROI, to get that information from those perspectives as well. People might have those different perspectives or added information about successes or challenges that they've had in their life that may be really pertinent to the job search process. Back over to you, Don.
Benefits counseling. I think we all learn from our mistakes. This was a mistake I made early on. So one of the ideas when you're helping a person find a job is to find out from them first, right off the bat, whether they want to maintain, if they have SSI or SSDI, do they want to maintain those benefits and work part-time? Do they want to work their way off of benefits? TANF as another example. And if they want to work off those benefits, you have to be very aware of helping them get a job that covers all of the things that they're going to lose. Maybe they lose a housing subsidy, maybe food and medical. Definitely if they make enough money, they're going to lose SSI, SSDI. The mistake that I made was I wasn't clear enough with a person about that early on, and they were on SSI and they got cut off of SSI, and then ended up getting back on it and deciding I'm never going to try working again. Big mistake on my part. The people that we provide services to need to go into finding a job being clear on that decision. Are they going to try and maintain benefits, or are they going to try and work their way off of benefits? And some people do. Some people do work off of benefits, not as many as perhaps would be nice. Because very honestly, and I'm going to do, my colleagues will recognize this as a soapbox moment that I'm on, SSI and SSDI were never intended to be forever income. How many of you heard Social Security is going to dry up at some point in time? I think we hear that kind of a lot. SSDI is part of Social Security. SSI is taxpayer money. And every time the governor budget comes out, there's a Washington state piece that's potentially on the chopping block. So we don't do anybody a favor by letting them think that SSI and SSDI are going to be their forever income, because they might not. So this benefits planning is important all the way around. It can happen in-house if you have somebody that's a certified benefits planner. It can happen by contracting outside. It can also happen through our Pathways to Employment website. There's a benefits estimator that doesn't take the place of benefits planning, but it sure is a great start in regards to helping people to understand what's going to happen to their benefits when they become employed. Excuse me. On to you, Darren.
I just wanted to add that these programs are all needs-based, and when you have earned income coming into the formula, there could be some reverberations and some changes, and we just want to educate people about those potential changes. During the fidelity review, I met somebody who had an overpayment, like over $30,000 in overpayment, because there wasn't the reporting infrastructure going on. And now he has a lifetime payment plan back to Social Security for those benefits. So definitely, it's always good to have these conversations, because things we do today can really impact people for the future. So thanks for that information, Don. Rapid job search. So I'm going to use Dawn's phrase. This is rapid job search, not rapid job get. So it's that process of starting looking. And with IPS, we're really focusing on engaging out in the community. Granted, some of this stuff can start within the office, focusing on the goals, getting some information from the internet, look at job postings, but we're really talking about getting out. After you complete the career profile, which is also on ips.works.org, it's a great document to use, but it really focuses on that relationship building and targets some of the desires that the individual has, so that we can start that process and learn about those opportunities in the community and start that employer development relationship. Just like we're building that relationship with the job seeker, IPS focuses on that relationship with the employer. So for very high fidelity, after the career profile is completed, we're out in the community in 30 days. Starting that process. Now, that doesn't happen for everybody. There's a lot of things, life comes up in between, but we build that model around engaging that process and starting that work out in the community pretty much from that intake process, so that we can look at strategies and how we're going to start that community integration piece and relationship building with employers. Over to you, Don.
Excuse me. So a couple of pieces of that rapid job search. It is, I don't know about you, but there's been a lot of times when I've gone back through my email or various items to think, when did I talk to that person? What did I have to say? What was the outcome? A tracking form is just a must. I know that a lot of agencies will put job search, I lost a word, just plain gone. Instances of job search in their progress notes. And what that means is then they have to go back through the person's progress notes till they find where the employer contact happened. So that tracking form can be huge. It doesn't, Darren mentioned and I've mentioned, it doesn't always mean getting a job right away, although it can. We have lots of people that'll come in and say, I'm going to lose my housing in 30 days if I don't have a job. I'll do anything. Well, that anything, we hone it down a little bit. Obviously, a person won't do anything. When they used to say that to me when I had a caseload, I'd say, okay, you're going to be a truck driver. And they'd say, I can't be a truck driver. I don't have a CDL. My response was, then let's hone it down a little bit. Let's figure out what you can do and you want to do. So there are survivor jobs like McDonald's or whatever, if that may be one, although that may be their end goal. That may be the kind of thing that they want to do long-term. And then there's long-term career goals. IPS says you can work with both of them. You can help a person get a survivor job and still work with them on their long-term goal of being Batman or whatever it might be. So very, very important stuff, as is the tracking of what's going on within job search. In my mind, a lot of this is about respect. I've done supported employment for enough years that I worked in a sheltered workshop once upon a time, 30 years ago. I've worked in settings where people were expected to go through this resume class and that interviewing class, and let's work on their social skills and let's do this or that. I'm sure people could work on my social skills. I'm positive. And if they did, I might still not be employed. And so the idea is to work with the person where they're at, what they've got that are strengths at this point in time, because they've all got strengths and weaknesses. And so that all is a piece of that rapid job search kind of thing. You respect them. They said they want to work. You help them get out. You help them start looking. Next slide, please, Darren.
Well, it looks like we have a question from Eric in the chat about the same form as the job development. Definitely, IPS has multiple forms. We do encourage people to use a job search form that would reflect what next steps of job development they're doing, plus a job support plan after somebody is employed. So some of those forms will be located at the ipsworks.org website under the library. So I just want to check to see if that's helpful, or if you had a question about the career profile.
I think this sounds like it might be the tracking.
Yeah, I was just,
form.
I guess I'm not tracking when.
Go ahead, Eric, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I guess I'm not tracking that specific piece of data, and I guess maybe I missed the form. I can go back and look through on the IPS website.
Sure. So we have an example of a great job development log, and I can sure send it to you after this as well.
Okay, that would be amazing.
And we can have a I will do that.
Yeah, definitely Pathways to Employment has some great forms for data collection to help with some of that. Thanks, Rand. My apologies with my breathing challenges today. So part of the job development process is that we really encourage people to implement a strategy in a format, and IPS calls it systematic job development. And being part of an IPS supported employment program, we really need to have time blocked out in our schedule that we're really focused on community engagement, where we're going out in the community, we're role models, and we're modeling some of those behaviors in the community with our job seekers, that we're having those face-to-face encounters, whether it's with DVR, Social Security, employers, maybe educational sites, all those different things, that we're really out there together, sharing, information, but being out there together. For high fidelity, definitely IPS has a strategy and how many employers they're focused on in meeting, but we really encourage people to block out time in their schedule that's really dedicated for time in the community to meet people, meet employers, and starting that out. That really builds some traction, and might be really hard at the beginning because, as Don said, being in social services, you're pulled in many ways and different demands for your time. But with IPS, it really defines how your time is spent and the focus of those efforts. In helping build the program, it really focuses on very intentional services to the job seekers. So kind of think about that in terms of scheduling time and blocking time out in your calendar or your staff's calendar so that you can dedicate different time to support employment activities, particularly the job development piece. Over to you, Don.
Yeah, incredibly good point, Darren, in regards to putting time in your calendar to make sure that it doesn't fall by the wayside. And I would also say the time that you're out with individuals can be that time to go talk to employers too. Sometimes when you're meeting with folks out in the community, it's a matter of, maybe having a cup of coffee and just discussing, so how are you feeling about the job search, and are we headed the right direction, and just, those general discussions. I worked with one gal that I can think of. We'd go out and do job development together, and while we were in the car and talking about the next place that we were going, she'd say, it's a low self-confidence day. Can you talk to the employer and I'm going to watch? or it's a high self-confidence day. I got this one. And sometimes I'd even stay in the car, Don, and she'd go in on her own. But it was a matter of gauging it based on what she needed for that given day. But another person on my caseload that was a gentleman that has intellectual disabilities, schizophrenia, had bad gait disturbance. I think he had tardive dyskinesia for medications that he'd been on for a long period and all the strange movements that go along with that. He wanted to do janitorial work in a specific strip mall because he had another small janitorial job in that strip mall. My dentist happened to be in that strip mall. So we went to see my dentist. We talked to the folks at the gal at the front desk, and she went back and got the dentist, and he came out and said, well, you know, my staff here does the cleaning. I don't really need that. And so we ended up leaving. And, you know, you can't help but wonder, is it because of the degree of disability that the individual had that they said that? Lo and behold, we're walking down the sidewalk to one of the next places, and the front desk gal came running after us and said, we told doctor we're not doing the cleaning anymore, so he's just going to have to hire him. What turned out is the gal that was, and they did, and for years after, I'd be in the dentist with my mouth propped open and the dentist telling me about how the guy's doing, and had to have a pep talk again about hygiene or whatever, but it was a long-term successful placement. And it turns out that the gal at the front desk had a son with disabilities, and that was part of the reason, you know, why I think she was probably the catalyst for that job placement happening. She just told the dentist, nope, we're not cleaning for you anymore. And I loved it. So part of the idea with that systematic job development is the idea of doing at least 6 employer contacts a week. It gives you something to shoot for. And I can tell you on a regular basis, if you go in and talk to an employer, I could sometimes get 6 placements done in 2 hours. Other times I'd get one or contacts, I should say, done in 2 hours. Other times you'd go in, and I remember this one because it was not the norm. Went and talked to the postmaster at the post office here in Moses Lake, who gave us a tour of the agency and talked for over an hour. That was not normal. And so in that case, I think I got a couple of job developments done in a 2-hour period. But shooting for 6, it's a good number. For those that may not be aware, I think our leadership did an amazing thing when they negotiated with CMS, because we can go out and talk to employers without the person present, without the participant present, and bill for that time as long as you have a participant in mind. We always used to use that to fill in when somebody had canceled or no-showed. We can make up that direct service time by going out and talking to employers. So it was a win-win. I mean, absolutely a win-win. On to you, Darren.
I think that's a great example where you have productivity time and billable time in the same package. As a former manager, it's like, yes, that's great utilization. In working with, excuse me, in working with staff, it's so incredible to hear these stories of other participants having relationships or maybe family members with disabilities. I found that very rewarding. And I think the more staff in doing that in the community, the more stories I learned about, you know, that there's those connections, that people are more aware of some of the work that we're doing and more aware of the importance of diversity in their work environments. So thank you for that information, Don. Time and limited supports. And in Washington State, we're a little unique because we do have the FCS program to support all the services, and it's 6-month eligibility period. So kind of within that scope, we're matching the time unlimited supports, that it's really focused on the individual, how much support they need, how much support they want. And maybe there's some natural supports that we can create in this process that we can pull back and they can be more independent because it is their job. We want them to be successful, and maybe we do intensive services up front and then slowly pull back in terms of what we could do to support. And some of those support services could be family, natural supports in the work environment, maybe other clinicians, other members of the community, depending whether it's a relationship. But as it says, the underlying goal is to have that person in the driver's seat, and focus on that process of being independent in the community, and only supporting them when they need it. Not saying we can't be proactive and engage with them and saying, hey, Darren, how's the job going? Haven't heard from you for a while, just to maintain the communication, because things can happen. It's always good to be on the proactive side to have that support plan than to find out somebody lost their job down the road. Over to you, Don.
And I will, thank you, sir. I will say too, and I'm not sure if everybody knows this, there are folks in the FCS program that have had reauthorizations for the full period of time that FCS has been in existence. So if a person has a need, it is possible for them to be reauthorized as many times as they need to, including those folks that have been reauthorized for the full period of FCS. So time and limited supports works within FCS and the authorization process. Excuse me. So time and limited supports, another thing that folks may not be aware of, but it's very similar to housing. We do job coaching. Sometimes that job coaching ends up being on-site with the person's permission. Hopefully it ends up being the ability to talk to the employer too, so that when we provide that level of support, we're providing the support to the employer and the person. That's the job seeker. So it's definitely based on need. As Darren was talking about, it's definitely based on what's going to help the person succeed. And it's definitely also about we all have supports, right? We all have our own support team. We all have somebody that we go to when we've had a cruddy day at work and talk about that. We want that for the folks that we serve too. And so sometimes that support that used to be the job specialist ends up being a family member, or it ends up being a housing case manager, or it ends up being their pastor. So when we talk about building that support team around the person, part of it is going to be who's going to continue providing that support long term. Darren mentioned that within IPS, there's a job search plan. So a written document, what's job search look like and who's going to do it. There's a job support plan. If the person needs support, and we all probably need something, what does that look like and who's going to do it? So it's a very intentional kind of thing and documented related to who's doing what in order to help the person be successful in the long run, both in job search and job support. It includes other folks with the person's permission. Back to you, Darren.
Thanks, Don. Here's a few key principles of IPS. As I mentioned, there's actually 25 elements. For the intentional piece, for highest fidelity, to keep caseloads of 20 or fewer for an employment specialist, really focus on the collaboration and working with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. That we only have employment specialists focus on employment services, very similar with housing, have those intentional services with supportive housing staff focus on those housing services. And the employment specialist, focuses on completing the intake, engaging with the individual, doing the job development, job retention, job support, that whole process. That it's just the employment specialist. So we're not, parceling out different things to kind of, jeopardize that relationship building with the job seeker. For high fidelity, IPS looks at 65% of somebody's time in the community. It's a lot of time. It has to be very strategic in meeting that. So just keep in mind, that's really the high fidelity. We really want that process to start. So you can get 30%, 40%, 50% and build up over time to meet some of those benchmarks. And it's really important to have discussions about disclosure very early on in the process, so the individual knows what you're going to share out in the community, but also to provide some information and maybe practice to see how comfortable an individual is, if they want to disclose, if they're aware of their disability, they're aware of how their disability might impact their problem solving, the time management, their interpersonal skills, all those type of things, to kind of have those discussions early so they're not coming once an interview comes up with an employer. And it gives you guys that relationship building and that time together to really build trust with each other, so that the job seeker understands what the employment specialist role is in the community. I used to have a business card that had my mental health agency on it. So I'm already disclosing that I work with a population that has some challenges and potential disabilities. So just having those really early conversations so the person can be, back in the driver's seat, is like, I'm not very comfortable with you doing that. Let's work on some job leads, some relationships, but, don't be giving your business card out with my resume, those type of things. It all depends on the comfort level, and that might change over time. But I think it's always good to have that discussion early and job offer time, because the employer might need to know about some potential accommodations that could be really necessary to make sure that retention and longevity occurs at the job site. And being assertive, engaged, that a lot is going on in our lives as an employment specialist, a lot is going on in individual lives, and sometimes we need to take that assertive approach to engage, and maybe outreach, just doing more than phone calls, texts, and letters. Then we might have to go out in the community to check in, or check in with other providers at the agency to see the level of engagement they're having, and maybe go out together to do some check-ins with folks. So it can be very powerful in terms of building that level of trust as well, that coming out to making sure that your welfare, that someone's okay, and seeing how we can provide more support for the individual. And now it's transition time.
So this is the second part of the smash up. And this is the part where we're hoping that folks will engage and share your ideas as well. I mentioned early on that part of the beauty of this whole thing that we're doing is the learning collaborative, and the fact that when we hear things that are great, we share with other agencies. And so we're hoping to hear some of those great things from you now, in addition to the great things that we've already got in the slides. So on to you, Darren.
Hey, Don, we just have another question in the chat, particularly about documentation and reauths from Eric.
Okay, so I see working with a person will most likely need to have many reauths just based on this predicted needs. At some point, do I have to provide documentation beyond just a reauth? So when a person's reauthorized, I should say, your progress notes, your treatment plan, those kinds of things are what are going to indicate an ongoing need. And so you have your reauth, but if there's a need to justify past that, AmeriGroup has those documents that or will have those. They'll request those documents to be able to determine what the additional need is. Does that help?
Okay. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, cool deal.
Thank you.
So for our focus on working with individuals who are homeless, these are some of the things that Dawn and I have come up in working in programs for decades with our combined work history and experience. And these are some of the takeaways that we've had, plus some input from individuals doing the presentation that we've gotten some feedback in terms of these are some of the barriers. They may not be all of the barriers, but at least, we wanted to kind of focus on specific barriers and strategies to work around to really support the individual and be very intentional about the services that we provide in working with the homeless population who has decided to focus on employment as part of their recovery.
So one of the most obvious barriers when someone's unhoused is that they don't have an address. There are, obviously there's options. Here's some of the ones that we've come up with. I was surprised, and we double checked that general delivery still exists. I didn't realize that it did, but you can see there the person's name, that it's general delivery, city, state, and zip, and then they go into the post office. There's a place to put that stuff. They go into the post office and pick it up. I believe, from what I also understand, that the post office doesn't want that to be a long-term kind of thing, but it is an adequate short-term kind of thing. Now, an employer isn't necessarily going to be impressed when, if they have to send some information and it's to general delivery. So there's lots of reasons to not make that a long-term, but it's an alternative to start out with, especially with getting some of those pieces put together that a person needs to do their job search. What ideas do you guys have? What kinds of things have you done related to folks with no address and helping them to start to look for work, or for the other things they need to do with where they need an address? What kinds of things have you done?
Well, go ahead and feel free to put some of those ideas in the chat, and we'll take a look at those as we go through the presentation. And as Don said, some of these might just be incremental changes or a temporary option before something else can be developed. So definitely just something put in the toolbox to work with folks. So this is, I attended a webinar and I get a lot of information from the Homeless and Housing Resource Center. So I just wanted to share some of the resources for folks, that there's a toolkit available, and it talks a lot about identification and some of the other barriers, how to get your Social Security card, even how to get your birth certificate. Don and I met some folks in California where their programs actually pay for some of the documentation fees that they have for this. So there are some really cool things and progressive things going on in some states. Unfortunately, there's some challenges here in Washington with some of that, because even some of these costs can be very challenging for folks to meet, but at least gives you some points of contact to look at some of the options, plus SAMHSA information and some information, a webinar from the Workforce Council on how to jumpstart the pathways to employment. So it just also shows a snapshot in time, and I'm sure this data is already higher in terms of total homeless individuals in the U.S. Definitely, it's a pandemic that is running across our nation. And hopefully with some of the new strategies being in place, we can really make a positive impact to decrease some of those numbers and create safety in the community for all the folks that we serve. Over to you, Don.
So there's stigma. We know there's stigma. There's stigma related to, kind of thoughts that perhaps people that are homeless are lazy. We know that's not the case. I think they have to work harder to survive than most of us have to work just on our day-to-day basis. They are not lazy. I think there's, kind of a stigma related to, I know there's stigma related to mental health, that people with serious mental illness cannot work. And we can do education on that. I know once upon a time I went and did job development and ended up going out and talking to a gal, and like Darren mentioned, I had the business card that has the behavioral health agency name on it, which is in my mind, not necessarily a good thing. You want to introduce that information, but at the right time. And so I didn't give her my business card, and I just kind of said, I work for the county, which I did. And she kept saying, yeah, but who? Yeah, but who? Who do you work for? Who do you work for? And I finally said, Grant Mental Health Care, because that's who it was at that point in time. And she said, oh, we don't work, or I don't hire those kinds of people. Literally, that is what it's burned in my brain. That's what she said. And, normally I probably would have been a little more politically correct. But I said, do you have staff that have gone through a divorce, who've lost a child, who've had, a variety of catastrophic things happen to them? She said, well, of course I do. And I said, then you hire those kinds of people. Thank you for your time. That was education, not in the best way. Don't do as I do. Maybe do as I say. But share those success stories about people that have serious mental illness that are successful. Work with folks in order to help them see over time. I have to say, when I first started out in this business 30-ish years ago, in regards to working with people with serious mental illness, I had my qualms about the ability of people to be successful. The more success stories I saw, the more I thought, I just needed to be educated. That was all it was. And so do people in the community. So researching the employer sometimes makes a difference. I mentioned the gal front desk at my dentist's office had a child with a disability. And so he was able to educate the other staff in the dentist's office. And I was able to do some of that too. And the gentleman there was a great success over a period of years. Certainly if the misconception is about a person being homeless, a person that's homeless being lazy, refer to the supportive housing programs. And I'm saying that to you, knowing you are the supportive housing programs. Sometimes people choose to work before becoming housed. Sometimes they choose to become housed before working. Whatever choice they make is the right choice. And so helping a person to get housing can actually happen simultaneously with looking for a job. What are some of the ways that any of you work with trying to decrease stigma? What kinds of things do you do? Other thoughts than perhaps sharing those success stories? And please feel free to either, put the information in the chat or unmute yourself. I know that typing that can be kind of a pain in the neck if you have a long response to make. So feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to share.
Yeah, I've always found those person-centered success stories are the most powerful, because usually different teams know some of the individuals that my staff and I are working with. And I think everybody has kind of been labeled like, oh, that person can't be successful, or they'll never be able to engage in the community, or all these different things. And then when you're really able to, chip away at that stigma and those biases, it can be a very powerful change process within the culture of the organization. But it takes time, and it might take a lot of success stories to really chip away at that foundation of stigma and bias.
In another time, when I was in another job, I moved to Moses Lake to work for SL Start and Associates when it was still SL Start and Associates, and did community access and supported employment with folks with intellectual disabilities. In that case, some of the community access was volunteer, so it differed from IPS. There was a gal in my caseload who very much wanted to run a copier at the museum. That was what she wanted to do. And I went and talked to the volunteer coordinator at the museum. She made clear without being rude that she didn't think the person was capable of doing it. I shared that it was a package deal. She got 2 for the price of 1, which was free, that I would come with the gal and help her to learn what she needed to do. The volunteer coordinator went from being very much doubtful to a strong supporter of the idea of folks with disabilities being able to be employed. So sometimes just that persistence and, the value added kinds of things of, if you're worried about them not succeeding, I can come with them. I can help them to learn how to do the job and that kind of thing. Sometimes that value added piece helps to get a foot in the door, and then you have a convert. And those are always the stories that I love. And that gal, she actually became quite verbal related to the ability of people with disabilities to be able to work. So there's good news out there. Next slide, please, Darren.
Well, that's a good point, Dawn. We're talking about stigma with our individual culture at the agencies, but employers can have some of that too, and even sharing with employers that you've been successful working with other folks in different job types can be helpful, at least kind of open that door a little bit more. So like maybe they might be a little bit curious and want to learn more about your program. So another challenge is having access, to a phone. Definitely individuals receiving Social Security, Medicaid, food stamps, they can access a Lifeline cell phone. There might be some challenges with that, particularly depending on what somebody's address is. But it's all trying to look at some of the resources that might be available. If somebody is maybe getting ABD funds or some kind of limited funds every month, maybe they can purchase a really inexpensive phone and a data plan. Or again, look at the natural supports to see if there's a message phone within the community, maybe a message phone within the agency that could be set up, or maybe even use the employment specialist, or maybe a peer specialist or a clinician. Look at all those type of options just to have that point of contact where they can share the information with the job seeker. Just as a job seeker starts, the employment process, they might need a phone or a computer access, internet access, email development and access, all those type of things. On our website, there's also a map of all the hotspots that are available. So just to make more people aware, once they have some technology, there's also ways to, make it work efficiently through the libraries and some other places, just to kind of give additional supports to folks who are going to have some of those barriers come up. Over to you, Don.
Grooming and hygiene. Various of these things came from folks on my caseload over the years. And it says short-term solutions because they are definitely short-term solutions. They are not going to be successful in the long run. But if a person can get to the point where they've become employed, they've got enough money coming in that they can rent a place, and you can help them find a place, these will at least get them kind of through. Where it says baby and body wipes, that was one of the gals on my caseload where she talked about what it was that she did in order to maintain some semblance of smelling clean and fresh. She also talked about the dry shampoo. And I know that still exists. I know it was a big deal once upon a time, but it still exists. It's out there. For some of the more urban areas, I know there's mobile shower and laundry facilities. For the more rural areas, that's not as likely to be the case. The fact that folks ended up using campgrounds and things along that line, and the more rural areas, that may be an alternative that's not available in the more urban areas. So it takes some creativity and sharing with each other. And I know the folks on my caseload would share with each other when they came up with a good alternative in order to, make sure that others could do the same thing. So have you guys got other ideas related to grooming and hygiene and accessing, the ability to take a shower or to wash your clothes or things along that line? What else have you seen?
I've looked at the YMCA because they give financial assistance.
Good.
Like the lowest they can do, like without financial assistance, is $50 a month. But if you do the financial aid application, that point you may not have any fee. And I've had a client that uses the showers there now. Like they work out and they use the showers. So it's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Perfect. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, Nicole. Who else? I see getting an inexpensive gym membership. Sometimes gyms will allow you to do a month for free, a week for free, whatever that kind of thing might end up being. And I know folks have taken advantage of that as well. So the gym membership trial kinds of things, sometimes it's free. And if a person is willing to be brave and assertive, that's an option. Anything else? Thank you for feedback. This is what we're hoping for. I think we learn from each other, and so that's really the hope here, is that things that we've missed, and I know we've missed some, that you may end up bringing up some additional ideas so that we can all benefit from that. Next slide, please, Darren.
Yeah, Don and I, we did learn about a bus in Olympia that goes around and addresses some of these hygiene needs for folks. So definitely when we do this and we get feedback, we like to incorporate that into the presentation. So if things come up later, please reach out to us, because we're always trying to update our information to really reflect the services that are can provide an opportunity for change for folks. So gaps in work history. Definitely, you don't have to be homeless to have gaps in your work history. Definitely a lot of the folks that my supported employment program worked with had that. And we want to really focus on skills and abilities. Just in meeting and talking with individuals who have had some homelessness, there's a lot of time management involved. There is a lot of resource management involved, and we can look at some of those skills and incorporate that into a skill-based resume, and maybe look at some maybe skills from former jobs that they've had and whatnot, and also look at, are they doing any volunteer work right now? Maybe they're in a shelter and maybe they do some volunteer work with that organization, kind of looking broad in terms of anything that we can do to kind of put in to a resume. Maybe it's doing some family care. Maybe there's something else going on that we can include in that skill-based resume. Look at maybe odd jobs that folks do, maybe even temp work that they might do, some day labor type work just to survive. Some of those might help focus on adding to the skills resume. Maybe people are going to a clubhouse as a member, or going to a recovery cafe as a member, and involved with some of those groups and some of those activities. Both of those organizations have a lot of opportunities for engagement that can really enhance somebody's resume. So it's really thinking outside the box sometimes and looking at all those different components so that we can encompass that into a resume. And a resume can be a very powerful tool to really change the perspective of the job seekers. Like, wow, I have accomplished something. I do have skills and abilities to do. There was one gentleman I was working with, and he brought his sister in. And he was really young, never had a job, but we looked at all the different things that he did in his high school and at the family. And his her reaction was, wow, this is really helpful, kind of changing that perspective that I don't have anything to offer, to something I can be productive in the community, and I have valuable skills that translate over to what an employer needs. Over to you, Don.
I do want to mention, and hopefully folks are also kind of looking at the chat Cami put in for Uplift Northwest, says it offers jobs, showers, lockers to lock up your stuff in Seattle, and she's got an address there. Says they also have eye exams with hardware on Tuesdays from 9 to 12, I think free of charge. And somebody's having tech difficulties. That one. Says they'll use insurance, but it's not free. And then Carol had said she's having tech difficulties. Sorry about that, Carol. The recording and the slides will go out after the webinar, so that you have a chance to look at that if you are having difficulties now. Hopefully nobody else is. So transportation. Once again, and I've said I'm from Moses Lake. Moses Lake is, in the scheme of things, not just rural. We're considered frontier. The next largest town is 70 miles away, and we're not huge. And so very often folks will walk to work because it's small enough that they can do that. Not so small that always works. Probably the furthest most locations are 5 miles out or things along that line. And in this area, a lot of people live out in the country. So sometimes bicycle, friends or family. We encourage people on our caseloads, or we did, I should say, to offer to pay for some gas money if they have a family member or a friend who's going to be giving them a ride. I don't think that's always the first thing that comes to mind of the person. We surely don't want to burn out somebody who's being their driver, and especially now with gas money the way that it is, encouraging the person to offer some gas money if they've got somebody giving them a ride regularly. We've been, excuse me, employment specialists have been known once a person gets a job to help them get to know their coworkers. And if somebody lives close by, sharing a ride with their coworker, and that's a wonderful solution because it could be much more long-term than some of the others. Obviously, buses can be an issue. I will tell you, in the more rural areas, if they've got a bus, the likelihood of them running late at night or overnight or holidays or in inclement weather is kind of slim. And so it's always a good idea to not only have a plan A, but a plan B and maybe even a plan C. I mean, I think we could all kind of do that. Other thoughts? What other transportation options have folks on your caseload ended up using?
Well, I've encouraged folks to, apply for services with Department of Voc Rehab, DVR, because sometimes they can help, depending on the need of the individual with the bus pass. I remember they purchased somebody some rain gear because the bus stop was so far away from where work was that they were exposed to the elements and they needed a winter coat and a raincoat. So some of those things. We also talked about buying a bicycle. And the individual decided not to do that, but at least the VRC, vocational counselor, is open to entertain about, different options for that. And I think just as you mentioned, with price of gas going up, it's even going to be harder for folks to come up with some of these resources to do it. So definitely a lot of challenging times out there. Well, some ideas come up, please put them in the chat. That we can explore some of those options. Definitely not, a lot of folks are involved with the justice system, definitely people in poverty and ethnic and cultural experience. They have a lot of these unfortunate circumstances, which I think we all need to be aware of in terms of providing services to individuals. But it can take some time to even help people who have some justice involvement obtain employment. Definitely Washington's been very progressive about banning the box, but still, people still need to be truthful at background check, and that came out. They would still know that they're at risk of being terminated. Now, for having that and not disclosing that during some of the job acceptance piece. So definitely some good things are happening, but it's always good to be aware. Sometimes some of the offenses may show up, but something else have happened where it's not actually a conviction. So it's always good to know about that. I've also worked with some individuals who are peers. They wanted to get their peer certification. So the staff really worked hard to make sure they could get that removed or vacated from the record so that they can work within the social service population. I think WorkSource has a lot of great resources for this. We also have some resources on our Pathways to Employment site on the Justice tab. So there might be some different pieces to work with. Also on Pathways to Employment, they have part of a letter that you can focus on the script. Like if somebody has some convictions, it might be necessary to disclose that, how somebody can be empowered by phrasing their story, how they've overcome these barriers and moved into employment. So different options to look at for that to really help people with the reentry focus. And I know King County has some additional resources, excuse me, for networking and employers that, at the time were justice involved friendly employers. But one thing I think the pandemic has shown that this creates a lot more opportunity and need for folks to become employed. So I've seen some great success stories and heard some from different fidelity reviews we've been on about how people with forensic history are becoming employed. But I think it's also just an added awareness and research that might you might need and support that an individual might need to meet some of these, the ultimate goal of becoming employed. Did you have anything to add to that, Dawn?
You know, and one of the things on there is self-employment is an option. Over the years, there were a couple, 3 folks that I worked with, and it wasn't necessarily because of justice involvement. In fact, it was more because of symptoms of mental illness. I had a gal on my caseload who was agoraphobic. And I know you hear that and you sometimes think, well, you know, maybe people can get treatment and kind of get out of the house. She tried that. She could not leave her house. DVR, this has been 15 or 20 years ago, purchased her a really expensive sewing machine. She ended up doing embroidery for sports teams and like the police department and, you know, just businesses. She did the embroidery and that work. Her husband ended up going and getting the orders and delivering the orders. It worked out perfectly for her. And like I say, it really was more mental health related than anything, but I've known of individuals that have started their own business because their justice involvement had stopped them from doing the kind of work that they wanted to do, and so they became self-employed. It's a less used option than traditional employment, but it is an option, absolutely. I will mention too, there's some great comments in the chat box. Susan had said related back to transportation, WIOA Title I provides support services to enroll participants. I can get this to scroll so I can read the other ones. Whoops, a daisy. Cami had said King County Metro has subsidized passes, bus passes for low-income individuals. As Casmira, I hope that I'm saying that right. Sometimes other case managers will give clients ride to appointments. Absolutely. You know, I know within the program that I worked for, we would help people to get to work maybe for the first week or so, and just let them know this isn't going to be for everything, but until we can figure out something else, that, you know, we can get you to and from work. And so that was something that happened through our employment program too. On to the next slide, Darren. So challenges, trauma, troping, that's trauma and coping in one word, just so you know. Challenges, trauma, and coping responses. You can see I have coffee. I've been drinking it. I haven't had enough. DVR, in the past, the behavioral health agency that I worked for will on occasion pay for counseling sessions for a person if behavioral health issues are what are stopping them from becoming employed. Developmental Disabilities Administration has lots of assistance to individuals that want to become employed. As do, you know, just kind of look at the other things there and recognize that they end up having support for folks. One of the supports that I really like that any of us can use, it doesn't matter whether, you know, whether you're a staff person, not a staff person, whoever you are, WRAP or WRAP for work, Wellness Recovery Action Plan. If you haven't heard of it, developed by Mary Ellen Copeland, and she has a website. I can't remember if it's the Copeland Center for something. I can't remember exactly. But the Wellness Recovery Action Plan is a written plan that goes through what do things look like when they're going well for you? What do things look like when they're going poorly for you? What kinds of support do you need from folks? Is there a point in time that people should kind of intervene on your behalf in order to help you out? Just a marvelous, marvelous plan. I had one once upon a time, and you know what? I think I need to update it. They've now developed WRAP for work also, which I'm very excited about. So there's that same Wellness Recovery Action Plan for work, which is a cool thing. One of the things about supported employment is that the staff providing the services aren't necessarily clinicians, but there's a lot of common sense stuff you can do related to coping responses. A lot of the people that we work with have anxiety or depression. And that's just because a lot of the people throughout the world have anxiety and depression. I mean, it mirrors those numbers. Practicing interviewing. coming up with the interview skills that are most likely to be asked, and practicing interviewing prior to a person going into an interview can be incredibly helpful to reduce their anxiety to some degree. Someone who's depressed and having problems getting up in the morning, a friendly phone call to kind of start their day out right can be a great coping technique. There's just a variety of things that are common sense that you don't have to be a clinician in order to use them and help the person kind of make it through whatever challenge it is that they're going through. And whether it's housing or employment, it doesn't necessarily matter. I was looking to see here. Nicole has put in a link. Or is that multiple ones? I'm not entirely sure. And then it says YMCA gym membership and showers finance. Oh, there we are. That's what it is. It's the application for financial aid for the YMCA. Thank you for that, Nicole. Much appreciated. Other thoughts related to some of the things that you do regularly to help people with their coping skills. What kinds of things do you do? I was never good at that therapeutic silence, where you're supposed to shut up and allow the other person to, that time to think about it and then actually give their response and sort of prompt them by shutting up. It's never been my skill. So feel free to hop right in if you've got some other ideas about how to help people with their coping. All righty, Darren, back to you.
So definitely substance abuse and addictions are other barriers and challenges that individuals face just to be safe and work their way out of poverty. Definitely, there's some low barrier programs out there like a recovery cafe. Does focus on need for sobriety, but definitely a safe place to build the relationships and build up the network in terms of AA, NA, Al-Anon support for individuals. Behavioral healthcare agencies, some have the SUD provide services integrated into the system. Some might be separate for outpatient or intensive treatment for that. Maybe individual support networks of individuals. Maybe there's some faith-based services out there as well. Maybe something more formalized for the medicated assistant treatment component for services. So again, it's really having access to resources and really braiding services together to support the individual on their recovery and safety process for supportive employment and supportive housing. Over to you, Don.
I see in regards to other support ideas, Peer Seattle, Peer Washington.
Your services.
Eric is actually on board, and there's like 5 different offices for Peer Washington now. Is that the case? I don't remember. Olympia, Spokane, Seattle,
and Kent.
And Kent.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so 4. Cool deal. Thanks, Eric.
Yep.
I see providing opportunities for it scrolled and now I can't get back up to where it was. Providing opportunities for them to meet folks who can relate to what the person's going through. Absolutely. Support groups and that kind of thing can be huge, related to helping people to be successful. I apologize, I'm messing with stuff trying to get a better view of my screen so I can see what it says. Peer-run community individuals in recovery, absolutely. Places like Peer Washington, Passages in Spokane, Revive in Spokane. I'm familiar with the East Side ones, but helping people to get connected so they can talk to others that have a similar circumstance about what's going on. Nicole says, I think you can help support clients with coping skills with supportive listening, as well as assess with them what they are looking forward to in life, and what hobbies do they enjoy doing, and build on that. Absolutely. Job search is not uplifting, not for any of us. That self-care piece of things while we're doing job search is such a need, and I think it's something that the folks that we may serve or any of us may not think about when we're doing job search, but that you know, self-care piece of things is just absolutely huge. I see Pure Washington, Seattle, Spokane, Kent, Olympia. Pure Washington's also in Pure Washington's also in Olympia, if I understand right. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the responses. I will say too, we're, you know, as I kind of predicted at first, we're probably not going to get through all the slides. We're going to send them out to you, and a lot of the information is relatively self-explanatory. Explanatory. That's evidently. I'm making all kinds of words up today.
Yes, you are.
Not,
It's a good day.
Not a good day. Woo-hoo! So sadly, one of the things that we see is some of the time, even with a job, folks are not able to maintain their housing. And so sometimes it takes two jobs, or helping a person to make that career advancement, or you know, that kind of thing, in order to help them to be successful. And the nice thing about IPS is that's a potential. That there's not an expectation that once you get a job, we're done with you. It's once you get a job, if you still have a career goal that you need to meet and need some help with that, we'll continue working with you. So I see Darren very wisely brought up the slide with our contact information. Thank you for doing that, Darren. We are always happy to talk with folks individually, to provide training for different agencies, to have discussions. Darren already mentioned, you know, please, if you come up with other ideas to add to our slides, let us know, because we do send them out. And sometimes, you know, folks will ask about how do you help a person who's unhoused to find employment. We would just send the slide deck to them. So do please let us know if you come up with additional ideas. And I know you have them. So please feel free to share. Thank you so much for having been here today. I know there's any number of other things that you could have done, and you chose to be here, and we appreciate you for that very much.
Thank
so.
you.
Hope it's been beneficial to you.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you guys being here and helping us kind of expand our brains into employment. So thank you.
Thanks for inviting us, Ryan.
Yeah, of
Thanks
course.
for everybody for the presentation.
Right on. A follow-up email will come out with the PowerPoint and the recording and all of that. So watch it in your email. And then we'll see you guys all next month.
Wonderful. Have a good day, everyone.
Take care. Should I go ahead and end it for everybody, Ryan?
Yep.
Okay, bye.